Family trips have a strange way of reopening judgments people think they've already settled, and when my cousin Daniel announced that the whole family would be vacationing together at an exclusive coastal resort, I already knew what role I would quietly be assigned before I ever arrived, because my family's success had always been measured by how loudly it could be displayed, by cars parked in driveways, by titles spoken confidently at dinner tables, and by how expensive a place looked from the outside, and I no longer fit neatly into that picture. The resort itself was stunning in the kind of effortless way only money and careful planning can achieve. Private villas hidden among palm trees, staff who moved silently, as if trained not to interrupt the illusion of calm, a stretch of white sand that looked untouched, and an atmosphere that made everyone speak a little softer without realizing why. And when I arrived alone with a small duffel bag and no dramatic entrance, my brother, Marcus, noticed immediately and laughed as if he'd caught me sneaking into a place I didn't belong, asking if I'd gotten lost or mistaken this resort for something cheaper. And when I smiled politely without answering, my sister Elena chimed in with a carefully disguised concern, suggesting that she hoped I hadn't overextended myself just to keep up appearances, a comment that earned a few quiet chuckles from relatives who were already settled into their narrative about me, the one where I had never quite figured things out after leaving military service, the one where I drifted instead of climbed, and I didn't correct them because years in uniform had taught me that correcting people who are committed to misunderstanding you is often a waste of breath. And so while they spoke loudly at the check-in desk about upgraded suites, oceanfront views, and loyalty status, I stood slightly behind them with my hands folded, listening, observing, letting their assumptions stack neatly on top of one another. And when my father shook his head and told me quietly that I should have asked for help if I was struggling, that there was no shame in needing support, I nodded once and thanked him sincerely, which only confused him because he expected embarrassment, not calm acceptance. And as we moved into the lounge, while the staff finalized arrangements, drinks were served and conversations resumed their familiar rhythm, circling careers, investments, promotions, and the quiet competition of who had done better since the last family gathering. And inevitably my name came up again, spoken in that half-concerned, half-dismissive way, someone remarking that I had always kept things vague, never really settled into anything impressive, and I listened without interruption, sipping water, grounded in the knowledge that my life had never been designed for outside validation. And then something shifted when the resort manager approached, not addressing the loudest voice in the group or the person with the most questions, but stopping directly in front of me, straightening his posture, and greeting me warmly, as if welcoming someone returning home, calling me sir, and saying, "Welcome back." And my sister blinked, visibly startled, while the manager turned politely to the group and apologized for the delay before informing them that their villas were ready, pausing briefly before adding that he appreciated me allowing my family to enjoy the property, a phrase that landed like a dropped glass in the silence that followed, my father frowning and asking what he meant by allowing, and the manager calmly explaining that the resort was privately owned before turning back to me and asking whether I would prefer the staff briefing before dinner or afterward. And in that moment the laughter drained from my brother's face as he let out a nervous chuckle and asked what was going on, and I finally spoke quietly, without ceremony, explaining that after leaving active service I had invested in several long-term projects and that this resort was one of them, saying it without pride or emphasis, just as a statement of fact, which caused my sister's face to flush as she asked if I owned the place, and I clarified that I was one of the owners and preferred to remain in the background, after which the manager nodded respectfully and stepped away, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than the ocean air. And when conversation resumed, it was noticeably different voices, softer, questions more careful, the edge of superiority replaced by something closer to uncertainty. And later that evening my father pulled me aside on a quiet balcony overlooking the water and told me that he hadn't known, that I never said anything. And I told him honestly that I wasn't trying to build a story for anyone, just stability for myself. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sound of waves filled the space between us, I reflected on something the military had taught me, long before money or investments ever entered my life, that real success doesn't announce itself or argue its worth. It doesn't rush to correct every insult or misconception, and sometimes the strongest position you can take is to remain steady and let the truth reveal itself when the moment is right. Not for applause, not for recognition, but because authenticity doesn't require witnesses. And standing there alone later that night, watching the resort lights flicker on one by one, I realized that the assumptions my family had carried for so long weren't entirely their fault, because I had allowed them to believe what they needed to believe to feel secure in their definitions of success, and I was finally at peace with that, knowing that my life had never been about proving anything to anyone else, but about quietly building something solid enough to stand on its own when the noise faded.